Hello and welcome to the Bestseller Experiment, where we continue to discover what makes a bestseller and inspire you to start, finish and publish your book. I'm Mark Stay, and Mr. DeVoe is taking some more time after his family bereavement. But the good news is, we send our love to Mr. D and all his family, but the good news is we've got the wonderful, the astonishing, the bearded Mr. Caimh McDonnell here with us. Caimh, how are you today, sir?
I'm very bearded. Thanks for asking. It's lovely to be here. Hello, team. I hope we're all well. Yes, very nice.
Thanks so much for stepping
Mark,
in.
Obviously.
Yes,
no
indeed.
problem at all. Absolutely delighted.
Yeah, no, it's great. Because last week I was just talking to myself, and no one wants that. I did enough. I do enough of that in the middle of the night. You know, it's no need to record it and inflict it on people. So now, just to say, Caimh, now I think this event is sold out, but you and I we're going to be with the mighty Ben Aronovich soon, aren't we?
Yeah.
Tuesday, 7th of February, Waterstones, Trafalgar Square. This is going to be fun, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very cool. I was delighted to get it, and Ben's great for doing it with us. But yeah, we're doing that because the Love Will Tear Us Apart is out on the 9th, technically the Thursday. So yeah, we're doing that, which is really exciting. I've also found out today, by the way, because we're doing Manchester, and they've already told us we've already doubled. We did a launch last year, which is the first thing back after lockdown they did in Waterstones in Deansgate, which is the biggest one in the north. And we've apparently already doubled the size of the audience for that, and they reckon we're heading fairly close to being a sellout because there's still a couple of weeks to go, 2 or 3 weeks to go. So, which is really cool because that's that's our local thing, because that's a Manchester book. So obviously we're delighted, and we're also doing events in Leeds and Liverpool as well, which I'm still waiting for updates on them, but we'll see how we go. But it's been exciting because you probably have more experience of doing author events than I do. Well, you definitely do. But it's like I did a first couple last year, but it's great to kind of get out and do stuff like that.
It really is. And let's not gloss over the fact Love Will Tear Us Apart. This is your new book. This is the third in the Stranger Time series, which I've been lucky enough to read. And it's such a joy. Really, really good fun. Quite intense this time. Quite heartbreaking as well. There's a lot of turmoil in this one. Do you want to give us a quick pitch?
Yeah, well, there is. Well, it's weird actually. I must work on the actual. Someone's asked me before what's about, and I go, it's about finishing lots of things that happened in the first two books, if I'm entirely honest. But yeah, it's basically Bancroft, the main character, one of the main characters, the editor of the newspaper, has always been convinced that his wife wasn't actually dead, even though everyone said no, she clearly was. And then he starts getting messages from her, basically, and it's really, well, it's one of my books, so like there's a lot of comedy and stuff in it. What did occur to me this week is just because it's been a year almost exactly since I wrote it. It is a book about grief in some ways, despite the fact it's funny and there's lots of silly stuff going on in it. And oddly, my father this time last year died, and I stopped writing for pretty much 2 months in the middle of all that was going on. And it did kind of inform the book, if I'm entirely honest. I think it did, because I was kind of processing. That was the first major death in my life, if you like, of a family member that, that wasn't a grandparent or something. So it did inform the kind of thing, which is weird to say because it is a funny book in the same way my other books are, but there is quite a lot of intensity in someone dealing with that kind of stuff in it, I guess.
Yeah, no, I highly recommended. In fact, the whole series, highly, highly recommended. I absolutely love it. It's such a blast. But underneath all of them, there's real kind of heart, as is the case with all your books, Caimh. They've all got a big heart. They've all got, I think it's something that's trying. Look at this, at the risk of this turning into a love fest. It's the same with your books, where you have you do, because I think if you just try and be funny or thing without having the characters going through some stuff, it becomes very superficial. So it is very important, and it's the secret of. It's what I did a Terry Pratchett podcast record yesterday, where we spent like just an hour and a half talking about Terry Pratchett, which is great. But the biggest thing is his books had enormous heart to them. And the humor wasn't just him trying to be funny. It was him being funny in that context. And they did have enormous heart in them. It's like that Neil Gaiman great quote about Terry Pratchett. People thinking he's just, but he's angry. And he is. Angry. There is that. Yeah. And there is that great thing in the books. And I think you need that for the books to come across as genuine and to really connect with people. So, yeah. Yeah. No, very much so. Very much so. Cool stuff. Right. Well, let's... talking about authors who are angry about things and a sense of injustice, let's talk about our special guest this week. We've got Peter May, who has been on the podcast before. He was previously on episode 165. And we talked about his incredible career because he wrote for TV, had over 1,000 TV credits. He was a script editor and script writer. And we talk about that. And he had essentially retired. He basically stopped, and he came out of retirement for his new novel, which I've got a copy of it here, A Winter Grave, which is a near-future thriller where climate change has completely changed the landscape. And he did some incredible research into this, into fossil fuels and how climate change, what's happening with climate change. And you can download that. It's a 16-page PDF, but we're going to make it available for you folks as a downloadable PDF, so you can check that out in the show notes. You can download it. But so Peter and I, we discuss looking into the near future, how some ideas are just ahead of their time, and the difference between writing for a contract and writing for yourself. Peter, mate, welcome back to the Bestseller Experiment. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well, thank you, and it's nice to be back.
Wonderful. It's lovely, especially with what is an extraordinary novel, A Winter Grave, which I've got a copy here, and I've got all sorts of research materials, which I'd like to talk about in a minute. But as I understand it, you were after, an incredible career, which we discussed in our previous episode, you were basically all set to retire. And then the COP26 climate conference happened in Glasgow and inspired you to write this. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, inspired, I don't know if that's the right word.
Right.
It made me angry. I was just sitting home. I mean, I turned down all future contracts for books and was intending to spend my time reading for pleasure, which I haven't really had the time to do in the last few years, and also dedicating myself to my other passion in life, which is music. I have a home recording studio and was spending a lot of time there. But it so happened that I'd read the IPCC report 3 months ahead of the COP26 in Glasgow. And, IPCC is the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, body of climate experts from around the world who produce reports at regular intervals on the progress of climate change. And they were coming out with dire warnings. I mean, dire warnings of action that really needed to be taken before the end of the decade. Or we were heading for fairly cataclysmic, catastrophic effects as a result of climate change. And that had really struck me. I mean, I guess I always knew that it was pretty grave, but it's always very background. It doesn't get that much time in the news. From time to time, something comes out and you become aware of things, and then you forget about it. And, I'm probably like most people in that respect. But having read the digest of that IPCC report, I was interested to see what COP26 was going to do about it. And in the end, they did zero.
Yeah.
I mean, the one thing that they had strived to agree on all the way through it was to phase out the use of coal and oil over a certain period. And that got diluted at the last minute to phase down, which means nothing.
Yeah.
Absolutely zero. And that was the Chinese and the Indians, I think.
Yeah.
And, at the end of it, I mean, the chairman was in tears. And so are a lot of people around the world, because this is the future of our planet, and it's the future for the younger generation. My generation, in a sense, is responsible for it to a large extent, because we ignored all the early warning signs, which have been coming out for decades, way back from the 70s and 80s. And I was left feeling bereft, angry, because it was effectively commercial and political interests that won out. So a fast buck now in exchange for the future destruction of the planet. Not so much the destruction of the planet, because the planet will recover in a million years or so. But human beings might not do so well.
Yeah.
And I thought, I've got to make myself kind of aware of exactly what's involved here, what the science is, what the arguments are for and against. So I spent 3 months researching it. I didn't have any thought at that time that I would write a book. I just wanted to be more, cognizant of what was going on. And during that period, as I became more and more aware of the science and the irrefutable quality of the predictions that of dire consequences, I realized I've got to do something about this. What can one individual do?
Mm.
And the only thing I can do is write. It's the only way I have of exerting any influence in the world whatsoever, a very, very tiny grain of influence. But I thought, well, I've got to do that because it's the only thing I can do. And so I set my mind then to working on the idea of how I could write. How do you write about a subject like climate change? It's so vast, and I was at a loss initially, and then I had a kind of eureka moment, which was that I wouldn't write about climate change per se. I would write in the genre that I write, crime thriller, a classic crime thriller story. But I would set it 30 years in the future in a world dramatically altered by climate change, so that this was a way of kind of opening people's eyes to what the reality might be like 30 years down the line. And 30 years is not very far. No. I mean, for a young person looking forward, 30 years is a long time. For someone my age, looking back 30 years is no time at all. It's just like that. And so 30 years into the future, it's no time at all. And so I did a lot of research on what the world might look like, and specifically a particular part of the world that I know well, Scotland. And it was enlightening, shall we say.
Well, you say research. I mean, your publicist sent over a 16-page document, which listeners, we are going to make available as a downloadable PDF, and I do recommend that you download it and read it, because it will give you plenty of context, not only to our conversation but to the novel A Winter Grave as well. And it is, I mean, it's very thorough, it's very terrifying as well. But going back to that decision not to write specifically about climate change, but to set it in an environment where climate change is happening and it is having serious consequences, that was your solution to sort of write about climate change without making it preachy. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, because the readers would get bored and annoyed with you very quickly if you're preaching at them some kind of political or emotional viewpoint. And I didn't want to do that. I'm a storyteller. So the first thing you have to do is engage your reader. But I wanted that engagement to have a context that would hopefully be a little shocking and a little enlightening, or maybe a lot shocking. I don't know. Yeah. Because when I did the research and I found all sorts of interesting ways of predicting what might happen. I mean, and it's a prediction, and it may not turn out that way at all. But it's quite a good bet. And I looked, for example, I found online an interactive map that you could input various criteria, date, temperature increase, location, and it would present you with what the world would look like in terms of sea level rise. And I was specifically looking at Scotland, various parts of Scotland, which in the grand scheme of things weren't quite so badly affected as other parts of the world. And when I broadened the outlook, Calcutta was underwater. Bangladesh had disappeared. Most of Florida was underwater. Much of the eastern seaboard of the United States. Lots of Europe, the northern fringes, particularly of Europe. And the map began to look very, very different. And that was enlightening. And this is, I set the criteria just 30 years in the future, and like a 2% rise, which is on the basis of current projections is quite modest. I mean, everybody's still aiming for this 1.5, which is a pipe dream. I mean, we've passed that threshold in terms of being able to stop it going beyond that. So I was able to then start building a sense of what the world would look like, and the surprising thing was that although we're talking about global warming, the way various elements of weather and sea cycles, circulations in the ocean operate, we could actually be looking at, extremes where you have extreme heat along the equator and extreme cold in the upper part of the northern hemisphere. Basically because of a slowing down or stopping of the Gulf Stream, which is part of a global circulation of water. But that's what makes Europe and the British Isles temperate.
Yes.
I mean, Scotland, if you look at it in terms of latitude, is on the same latitude as the Alaskan Panhandle.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't have the climate it has. It should be a lot colder, and would be without the Gulf Stream, regardless of global warming. So, there are many surprises in there.
We were talking to Amanda Scott on a fairly recent episode. And again, listeners, I'll put a link to the show notes in this. It was on one of our deep dives. Well, she was talking about, because like you, she's deeply concerned about climate change. And she was talking about writing not as a near future stuff, not as a utopia, but what she called a throughtopia. This idea that you can show the near future and show people living in it. And you have a choice to make it difficult for people, or you can have people, offering solutions to climate change. You're just 30 years in the future, very near future. What were the challenges in bringing the sort of day-to-day life? What are the differences? If someone gets up, makes a cup of tea, makes their breakfast, goes for a walk, moves about, drives a different kind of car, those kind of quotidian changes, what were the challenges in bringing those to life? Because once you change something as fundamental as climate in a story, it affects everything, doesn't it?
It does. I think the thing that I focused on was that actually people are very adaptable. And although the changes in the climate are going to bring lots of fairly dire consequences, we will learn to a large extent to deal with them and live with them. And so, in a sense, my characters were just living normal lives because the way the world is now is normal to them. So what I didn't want to do was be all the time be saying, "Oh, and this is such a different way of life," and you wouldn't do this in the morning, and because we've adapted to it. This is just life; it's how it is. And in the background, you're painting a picture of, the Clyde estuary and the storm surges that have flooded large parts of Glasgow, and they've built levees to, try and protect parts of the city, and failed to build them in time to save up. I was interested also in the sense of, because I'm setting something in the future, it's not that far in the future, but things will change. Transport, for example, I mean, we're already moving towards electric vehicles. And I was looking at these electric kind of helicopters, in fact, eVTOLs are called.
Right.
And the development of these it's well underway. In fact, I was reading a thing just the other day about how they're going to introduce these in Paris for the Olympic Games being held. Paris,
right. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
They're going to be having shuttles backwards and forwards from the airport with these electric choppers, effectively.
Wow.
So they're there and it's happening, and it's communications. What does a mobile phone look like? But again, it's the kind of thing where, people aren't drawing attention to these facts. They just are the daily reality. So, they just look a bit strange to us because we're looking into the future.
Yeah. It's things like these vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, and I think it's Icon mobiles, which are like wearables, which is, where the technology is almost, part of your clothes or glasses or what have you, and they're thought controlled. This all sounds quite futuristic, but it is kind of just around the corner. Having peeked into the future as you have, is there anything that's going to make lives more challenging for authors? For example, when I was a child, you could when I was reading thrillers as a child, you could put someone in the middle of the woods and they'd be alone and they'd have no one to help them. Now they've all got a cell phone and can call for help immediately, which I know, you listen to horror writers and thriller writers, like the mobile phone has been the death of tension. You usually have to find an excuse to get around it. Is there anything in the future like that that's going to, would ICOM mobiles be even, make our lives even more difficult?
I don't know that the technology would make life more difficult. I think the thing, it's the social disruption which is going to affect us most of all. I read a very interesting book on the subject. When you look at sea level rise around the world, there are something like 2 billion people live within 100 kilometers of the sea. And there are a lot of cities situated on or close to the sea that are going to be washed away or going to be underwater. And you're going to have this mass migration of people. The area around the equator is going to be virtually uninhabitable because of heat. So you're literally talking about billions of people on the move, and they're moving to areas to escape flooding, heat, crop failure. And they're moving into areas where people are struggling with that, and they don't want any more people coming in.
Yeah.
And we're looking at things like immigration wars, and the immigration problems that the government's very happy to draw attention to at the moment are absolutely nothing compared to what's likely to happen. I mean, it's that kind of thing that will most affect the world and the social structures of our lives and our politics.
Now, listeners, you may be sitting there thinking, yes, Peter's done his research. He's been very thorough in his research, but he doesn't have a crystal ball. He can't possibly know what's in the future. But you've done this before. In 2005, you wrote a novel called Lockdown, which was rejected by publishers because they thought the portrayal of London under siege by a flu epidemic was unrealistic. Can you tell us about Lockdown, how that came about, the rejection, and what happened with that novel in the end?
It's strange because it grew out. I was in the middle of writing my series of books set in China in the early 2000s when SARS came along. I don't know if you remember SARS, respiratory. It's a coronavirus as well. Came out of China, and everybody thought, "Oh my God, this is going to be worldwide," and it actually. It peaked and fizzled out, fortunately. But at the time, I was looking at that and thinking, "Oh my God, if this really blows up," I was writing this series set in China. What would Beijing look like if they locked it down because of a viral epidemic? And what would it be like for my detective investigating a crime against that backdrop? And I proposed this idea to my publisher, who said, "Nah." And so I went off and did something else. And it was after I'd finished the China series, and I'd written another 2 books. One called The Black House, which was the first of my Lewis trilogy, and one called Extraordinary People, which was the first of the Enzophile series. And I couldn't get either of them published. And most people know, The Black House went on to become my huge breakthrough book. But at the time it was rejected by every publisher in the UK. It was actually my French publisher who published it in the end in French. But I was kind of desperate at that time, and I needed to write something that I could sell, that I thought would sell, and I needed to do it fast. And I looked back at this idea and thought, well, okay, let's take this idea, let's set it in London. It can't be SARS because that's come and gone. What are scientists saying is going to be the likely next big pandemic? And bird flu was the thing that kept cropping up and cropping up. So that's what I based my research on. One of my China books had been set in the USA, actually, and it dealt with the resurrection of the Spanish flu virus. The Spanish flu of 1918 killed tens of millions around the world. And so I'd done a lot of research on that. And And actually, if you go back and you look at the way the world dealt with the Spanish flu back then, it's pretty much how we dealt with the coronavirus when it came along. With the mask wearing, the closing down of schools and shops, the locking down of social activity as we know it. So it all happened before. And so when I did my research and I put the whole thing together, I'm saying, okay, this is what London looks like. We've got this flu epidemic, bird flu epidemic, which is much worse actually than COVID. And painted the picture of that. And as you said, the publishers at the time just weren't interested. I mean, it's you're a crime writer, not a science fiction writer. This is beyond,
Right.
the scope. And I put it away in a drawer. And but 15 years later, suddenly we had COVID. And I mentioned it to my publisher that I had this manuscript, and he literally read it overnight and phoned me the next morning and said, "We have to publish this now." This was March 2020, just as lockdown was starting.
Yeah.
And it became a worldwide phenomenon. I spent about the next 3 months locked in my home recording studio doing interviews around the world. I did CNN live, and I was doing stuff in Australia, New Zealand, Africa, India, Spain. I mean, it just went viral.
To coin a phrase.
Yes. And so, I mean, that just came out of left field. I mean, I guess it took my mind off the fact that, I was as much a victim of coronavirus epidemic as everybody else.
Yeah. That's phenomenal. I should also, listeners, Peter did donate the money from his advance to charity supporting health workers and victims of COVID as well. So it's important to note that too. Peter, before A Winter Grave, you were talking about retirement. Is retirement still, having gone back and written a novel, have you got the taste to write more, or is the recording studio beckoning? Is that going to be what's coming in the future from you, Peter?
I don't know, to be honest. I didn't expect to be writing A Winter Grave, and yet there it is. I think having removed the pressure of the contract, I was kind of moving from one 3-book contract to the next, and that constant pressure to produce because you're contracted to write another book. I mean, I found it was getting intolerable. And when I said no more, that's it, I'm finished, I've met all my contractual requirements, I felt this weight lift off me.
Right.
And so that when I came to write A Winter Grave, it wasn't because I had a contract to write a book. It was because I really wanted to write it. And so when I look into the future, I'm not saying I won't write another book, but if there's something comes up that sufficiently motivates me and to really want to write, I will. But I'm actually in Spain at the moment. But when I get back home, I'll be finishing off a recording in the recording studio. It's a song about climate change that I'm going to release at the same time as the book comes out in January, and I've had quite a number of people working on it with me, and I think it's a friend of mine wrote the lyrics. He's a poet, and I think they're very, very powerful lyrics. I just wish I could find somebody with a better voice than mine to sing it. I might be able to do that yet, but I think it's a really good piece, and I think it goes well with the book. So I'm hoping it will get some airplay when we. Not for financial purposes. I mean, I don't expect it to make any money. If it did, it would go to charity.
Well, if it's available by the time this episode comes out, we'll put a link in that so people can have a listen to that too. Just going back to this idea briefly of being out of contract and not having that publisher or agent expectation. Did that mean that you wrote differently? You said you felt a sense of liberation. Was that in your writing as well? Were you kind of thinking, I'm just writing this for me, I'm not writing this because of a contract or people waiting for the next in a series? Did that change the way you wrote? I'm not sure that it did. It's a good question.
because I have a very particular approach to the way I write. I mean, I write very quickly, in a very structured way. I write a very detailed synopsis of the whole book before I begin, kind of scene by scene by scene. That probably comes from my TV writing background. And so when I sit down to actually write, I'm not worrying about where I'm going next. Of course, it evolves as you write, but I'm not, I know where I'm going next. And so my focus is entirely on the writing. I write fast. I write 3,000 words a day. Nothing changed when I wrote A Winter Grave. I took exactly the same approach. In a sense, I put the pressure on myself to do it.
Right. Okay. That's good. And just finally, are there any other novels that you haven't published that might be harbingers of doom for the future? Is there anything you want to tell us, Peter? Is there anything we should prepare for in 2023?
No, there's all these bottom drawers are empty these days. Everything seems to have been published. So no, I don't. I think there's plenty in the world to be scared of. Whether I'll write about them or not, I don't know.
Okay. Well, in the meantime, folks, enjoy A Winter Grave. It's an absolute page-turning, gripping read, and gives you lots to think about as well. Peter May, thank you so much for speaking to us, and I hope to speak to you again one day.
Thank you.
What are your writing dreams? Finishing that book, quitting the day job, becoming a best-selling author? Well, over 4 years, we've studied the advice of over 300 best-selling authors who've collectively sold over 500 million books. And we are excited to announce the Bestseller Academy. If you're ready to take your writing to the next level with accountability, craft, and coaching, your bestseller dreams are now only a click away. To find out more and apply, visit bestsellerexperiment.com/academy. That's bestsellerexperiment.com/academy.
Huge thanks to Peter May for speaking to me. And that was absolutely fascinating. Like I said, that PDF is available for you folks to download. And it is it's kind of terrifying, isn't it, Caimh?
It is, and it's I mean, it is. Like I was reading through the PDF this morning, and I was saying, I think I sent you a message saying I was already in a bad mood because I was dealing with real estate agents. Like, this is not the way I'm going to cheer myself up. It's like, well, look, all these houses will be underwater in 20 years. That's the upside here. But at least those estate agents will drown first. But but I mean, look, jokes aside, obviously it is very grim. And I think it's clearly a passion project for him in the best sense of the word, that he had to do something about it. And I thought it was fascinating where we had that thing where you kind of go, well, what can I do? And what he did was he did the thing he does best in the world, which he made it into a compelling story that hopefully gets the message across. Because when you can do that as an author, I think, like, I'm trying to think, there's a few different examples of people. Don Winslow is the one that comes to mind, not about the environment, but about the drug war. And his I'm always recommending his Cartel series, 3 books that are just incredible. I would put them up there with The Godfather as the level of sheer brilliance in the writing and everything like that and the storytelling. But they also, you will come out of it. It changed my opinion on the war on drugs completely. And I very passionately believe, well, frankly, what Don Winslow believes now. And in the same way, I guess with this, he's obviously just trying to change minds by doing what he does best. But as you know from working in publishing, it's a tricky sell. I'd imagine if you're a new author trying to do this, you'd probably have a hard time getting away with publishers. But because he's Peter May, I guess that, there's going to be people who will take it on. But there will also be some readers that just go, oh, I want escapism in what I read. I don't want to be dealing with the horrible truth of what's coming, I guess.
Well, we're going to talk about selling the near future and post-apocalyptic fiction in the extended version for patrons. So we'll talk about that soon. What interests me with that thing of, you talked about it as a passion project, it's that thing of removing the pressure of the contract. He said, I felt a weight lift. And finally, he was, I mean, we all write under contract. It is a job, but he kind of felt that he was able to write the book that perhaps he'd always wanted to write, without fear but for us, it's, we do have to deliver, to a date as per the contract, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, it's for most authors, let's be honest, that's the thing. It's typically 2 or 3 book deals. Some other people are on different kind of, I think that's probably the most common, I think. Would that be fair to say from publishing terms? From what, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, you do have to, I mean, it's a weird thing because the other thing is most authors these days aren't full-time authors. You know, as we all know, they're doing other stuff, working day jobs and stuff. So there is that thing where you're writing to a target, but I think they have to be more flexible with people with day jobs, because I honestly don't know how people do it with a day job. I mean, 200 words a day and stuff. I guess that's the way you do it. You do it by chipping away in the way you've helped people do. But I must admit, I've been in a position where I'm lucky enough never have had to work in that environment, because it can be challenging. But they do have that, and you kind of go, and it's one of those things where you want the contract because you want to know there's going to be books coming out. I guess the other side is the publishers want to go, right, well, we're going to have a schedule these. We know you're going to have a book from you every year at this point. But obviously, I mean, I'm lucky where I think both of us are lucky that we enjoy what we're writing. So it's never been this feels like a weight. But I'm sure there are authors out there that probably go, God, I've got to do another one of those books and I don't know what I'm doing. And yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things to talk about. One there is the author that might have spent 5-6 years writing their debut novel, and they get a deal and they're told, great, love it, let's have the second one in a year, thank you very much, which can be crippling. And
like
there is
difficult second album, isn't it? That happens with bands a lot with them.
Yeah. And you do have to kind of knuckle down and find a new routine. And if the advance doesn't allow you to quit the day job, then that is tricky. And we've spoken to a few people who've done that. But the other thing is writing something that if you're writing to a contract and it doesn't make you happy and you're maybe stuck with the series, I kind of have seen that professionally. I've seen, I mean, it sort of happened to me. I remember when I was starting out as a screenwriter, you're very much a wallflower and desperate to write anything to get a credit. And I remember a producer coming to me with an idea. That was my first mistake, accepting that. They said, I've got this idea for a movie. Would you be able to write it? And it's the kind of movie I would watch. It's not really the kind of movie I would write, but I happily agreed to write it on spec for very little money. And it was 2 years of misery because I was essentially writing their idea. The money wasn't good. And the day I walked away from that, and it never got made. It never, ever got made. I felt a weight lift, as Peter said. I felt I could finally get on with my own thing. So there is I think with writers that are starting out who, and we can be a bit desperate and will say yes to anything. I think there is a danger that you might end up in a kind of a miserable situation. And the other thing I've seen is where people might have signed up for a 3-book contract, and it might be a trilogy, and the first book just doesn't work. And they are obliged to write books 2 and 3 of what might be an epic series, hundreds of thousands of words, and they kind of know that hardly anyone's going to read it, and I've seen it happen, and it's kind of heartbreaking.
Because I suppose you have to you got to fulfill your contract and to get them, you've already been paid in advance on it, so you have to fulfill it or give the money back, which is I guess that can be. Yeah, that must be rough, all right. It can be. By the way, just on the thing, I had a similar experience where when I got fired from Rastamouse, I must have told you a story before, have I?
Go on.
Rastamouse is a kids show in Britain, very popular, and it's done great. It was based on kids' books. I was doing really well in kids' TV at the time. They asked me to come in and write the thing, and I had a meeting with the author and all this sort of stuff. And the problem I had was the books are great because what happens is the guy who's the baddie kind of sees their error of their ways, and there's a kind of rehabilitation message at the end of it, which is very healthy. Here's the problem I had. They wanted to do like 23 episodes or 20, whatever was in the thing, using the same characters. So I was like, but that means that character will learn the error of their ways, and then in the next episode, they're going to have to go back to doing something wrong again. And they were like, yeah, don't worry about it. But it was like, but it doesn't, it basically sends a way worse message because it just shows that they can't change. And I literally, and that was in my head, that like they were sort of just get around it, be fine. I was like, oh, and I was trying to write for that. And it's like when you said, when they finally said this isn't working out, I was so happy to be fired. Yeah. Because a part of me was like, I'll just keep working. I've got work ethic. I'll just keep going. And I was so pleased when someone said this isn't working. And Rastamouse went on and did great. and good luck to him. But it was just fundamentally in my head, it was like, this doesn't work for me. And you can get trapped in those situations. I think one of the things with those situations is you have to understand it when it happens. And maybe when you've got a bit more experience, maybe have a chat with your agent and stuff and say, look, this isn't going great. And you need to be able to identify, I think, as well, because people can hit the wall a bit when you're just writing a book. And sometimes that's just part of the normal process. So you want to be very careful, that you're not just hitting the wall like you would do in any project. You have to understand that this is something different.
Yeah.
But yeah, like with anything, if it's making you miserable, you shouldn't be doing it. You need to find a better way out of it, I guess.
Yeah.
But I guess it's one of those things, you just need to understand that it is a job. It's a great job being an author, but it is a job. And, you have to remember that.
We spoke to, again, I'll put a link in the show notes to this. We spoke to Mark Huckabee and Nick Ostler, who at the time were writing for Peter Rabbit, the animated series, and since they've written on the Moomins, and they've been getting all sorts of awards for that. They're really, really good at writing sort of animated TV shows. And they were saying, that the trouble that they had, the biggest problem they had to overcome was inventing 22 ways for Peter Rabbit to get in and out of trouble and learn something at the end of it. It's really, really difficult. But they were saying as well that that writer's block thing of it's problem solving. They never had. Yeah. They could not afford writer's block because they had to deliver. They talk about a contract. There's no contract like a TV contract. You can't miss those deadlines. You've got to deliver because otherwise the whole train crashes. So, they were just saying you have to work through it. You have to, and they worked as a pair, which I think writing TV and film always helps. If you're on your own, it can be quite despairing. But yeah, I'll put a link to that, folks. You can have a listen to that.
Yeah, because I had the same when I was doing kids TV. My height one, I was doing a thing called Pet Squad, which is the animated series that I created. Well, the same company, Darren McQueen, who are brilliant, have now gone on to win all kinds of awards. But I was also doing a thing called Bear Behaving Badly with them. It got to the point where I was still writing on Bear Behaving Badly as the lead writer. I was also the lead writer on Pet Squad. I remember sitting down in December because they'd asked me to and said, when would you like to go on holidays? Because they're such a good company. They had everything planned out. But they also knew that basically I could deliver scripts fast and regularly, and they were kind of used to me doing it. So, but they literally said, right, we'll put you up to here, and like, do you want to take 2 weeks off in June or July, maybe? You say, okay, and then we'll go back and then and they had the whole year planned out, which was crazy. I've never been that regimented before or since. But yeah, it can be like that. And that was, I enjoyed doing that, so it was okay. But that was a year of serious, probably the hardest year of work I'd say I've done in anything, which isn't that impressive because I was in IT before that, and I was the guy who got by I was scraping by, let's be honest.
But yeah, there's a lot of burnout in TV and TV writers' rooms, and it is very intense. Very intense.
It is. It's very intense because it's either all or nothing, isn't it? TV particularly. You're always like, because you have the work, it's all go, 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 go. And then there's loads of sitting around waiting for someone to get back to you and wondering why nobody's got back to you. And yeah, it can be, whereas I guess writing books, but I genuinely prefer writing books. I'm not even involved in the TV things of my own stuff now, is because I like the pace better. I like the control better, where nobody's really asking me what I'm doing day to day, week to week. Even if I come in and say I'm not having a good day, my wife goes, "We just take a day off, you want?" I was like, I suppose I could. It's like I am my own boss, but yeah, I generally, it's an easier flow, I think, writing a book just by the nature of it.
Yeah, I think so, because my writing partner on the film's John Wright. He's the director, and when he's directing a TV show, and he might do 1 or 2 episodes of a TV show a year, I know that he might as well be on Mars. He's off planet. It's so full on that we put everything to one side, and then 6-8 weeks later he goes, "I'm back, right, let's write something," which is quite handy because it allows me to write my stuff in between. But yeah, it's intense stuff. And Peter had retired. Do writers ever really retire? Do you ever think about retiring? Because I don't. I want to die with a pen in my hand, basically.
Yeah, I could see myself slowing down and sort of having a better balance, probably. But I certainly don't see myself retired. The same as, like, I have a couple of mates who are stand-up comedians, and I have this conversation with one of my mates in particular all the time where he's picked the date he's going to retire, and I'm like, I've known you for 20 years. What on earth are you going to do except sit around all day and write gags and have nowhere to do them? It's like, you don't have a hobby. You literally have no hobby. And it can be one of those things when you have a job like this, especially when it's quite if you're working full time and then doing something after it, one of the things you'll have, like I had this in a weird way when I gave up doing stand-up. Stand-up sort of came with the social life inbuilt. And I had the thing where I was now in my house all the time because I'd no reason to leave it. Yeah. And my wife was like going, you need to find a reason to get out of this house because you're driving me crazy. You just go down to the office and you need to find something to do with yourself. Like, because you're not traveling the country anymore and you're not seeing Gary 3 times a week and sitting around eating chips while telling each other stupid stories. You need to find something else. But it is one of those things, the transition between being, a part-time and a full-time writer is a big one. And it's kind of weirdly like, when people retire and they've no idea what to do with themselves, which is a very common thing. Obviously, you're still working, but at the same time, you do have to find a balance to it and stuff. But I bet you Peter May's going to write another book after this one, to be honest. Because I think it is in people that they don't really retire. Even Terry Pratchett up until the end, he was still going. And he... Interestingly enough, I know when reading the book that like even before his illness, he wasn't really signing long-term contracts anymore because he didn't really want to. He didn't like you were saying about not having the contract. He deliberately avoided them from what I can gather from the book. But he was Terry Pratchett. It didn't really matter. He just had to turn up and tell him he'd write a book and they would literally be popping champagne corks. So, I think I know Peter May, I think he's, from what you said in the interview, clearly big into his music and stuff like that. But I think you're not as good at something as he is and just stop doing it. Exactly. And it's not like you're a footballer where your body gives up on you. As long as you can still write, I think you will probably, it's part of the thing. Like if you look at the big crime names in publishing, crime is one particular genre, but all the big names in British publishing are still there. But even one of them said it to me that we're all just getting older together and they have a really hard time in publishing, establishing new brands, frankly, in those, because like the big names like Peter May. But so they're all just keeping going, and the publishers are like, "You are going to keep going, aren't you?" Like even Lee Child is now, his brother's writing the books with him and everything because the publishers are terrified they'll actually retire.
Yeah. Yeah, well, look, let's talk about this more in the extended edition. Now, folks, this episode of the podcast has been brought to you by the wonderful people who keep us going. So our Bestseller Academates, the people in the Bestseller Academy, are our patrons on Patreon. So if you join the Academy, you get to hear our extended episodes. You get to hear our deep dives. Same with Patreon as well. So if you want to support the podcast, go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support. If you want to find out more about the Academy, go to academy.bestsellerexperiment.com. There are links in the show notes as well. And in the extended edition, myself and Caimh are going to be talking about future challenges for authors, selling the near future and post-apocalyptic fiction, swapping genre, and a whole bunch more. Welcome to the extended edition of this episode with Peter May and my special co-presenter, Caimh McDonnell. Caimh, future challenges for authors. Now, the big thing that's changed between me interviewing Peter, because I interviewed him last year, around about November last year, I think, and we were talking in the interview about how mobile phones have basically made writing thriller fiction a lot more difficult. But the big thing that's changed between me interviewing him and now is this conversation about artificial intelligence and authors and fiction and writing. Is it something that you're worried about? Is it something you're concerned about?
Honestly, and it's one of these things, you see the articles and go, oh God, yeah, it sounds bad. And then you actually, when you start thinking about it, go, I honestly don't think, I think they can use AI to write articles. I think people are going to use them to cheat in university quite a lot. I think they already are. But I don't think somebody's going to be able to do a book. I think the amount of jockeying, if you will, that you'd need to do to guide this AI to actually write a book, you might as well just write the book. I don't believe it will understand the narrative structures and it could end up writing a really average book. I think that's the thing. But my fundamental belief is I don't think it will have the sparks of inspiration that you would need. So I think we're probably going to see some people try and crank out rubbish books on Amazon, but let's be honest, they're already sort of doing that anyway. It's just there's a lot of fraudy, like there's all these things you occasionally see on YouTube about I've never even read a book and I've written 50 bestsellers on Amazon and I make £100,000 a month. And you're going, right, so why are you selling people a course for $29.99 to tell him how to do this. If that was true, this makes no sense. But yeah, so there is these, I think there'll be some low level things like that. I think where AI will have a much bigger effect is on narrators. I think there is a thing there, but even there, I believe there will still be a place for a brilliantly acted human voice doing a production of a book. But yeah, I can see it having more an effect there, but I don't think it will affect actual writing in that sense.
Yeah, I think voice is the important distinction here, because Jeevani Chirika, one of our friends of the podcast, she did some experiments with Chat GP or whatever it's called, I'm not sure. And I'll put a link in the show notes for this listener so you can check it out. And it's competent. It's written kind of in the way that a middle school child might write, but there's no voice to it. There's no rough edges. There's no surprises. It wasn't a single surprise. And I think one of the things that people who aren't writers just assume that it's about, oh, you just need to write in a certain order and have certain things happen in it. But so much of fiction is about having a voice and having an authentic voice that that people come back for. You know, you're talking about Don Winslow earlier. One of the reasons you go back to him as an author is not just because of what his view on the world, it's his voice. I watched Slow Horses on Apple and I picked up Mick Herron for the first time. You know, lots of people have written spy novels, but he's writing it in a way that has this kind of sly tone. He's got a wonderful turn of phrase, the way he describes characters, you know, and it's that way that when we write, we surprise ourselves. And hopefully we surprise the reader too. And I'm not sure AI, no matter how clever it gets, will ever be able to do that. So, no, but yeah, I think as a tool for writing blurbs, maybe as a tool for writing copy, then maybe that's something to worry about. But
if it can generate something you can look at and go, well, maybe I should turn it, try this. If it's something to get yourself going and all that, but. Yeah, I really don't think it's. In fact, I think you might have even said about our authors going to have to start putting a note in their book saying that this was not generated by AI. This probably again goes to voice, because I do authors notes in my books and the Bunny books now, because we started doing it on one of the American ones, and that was one that went weirdly viral.
It did, didn't it?
And it was a really odd thing. Like 4 years after the book came out, somebody just put a picture of this, not even a good picture, it was quite blurry, of the note on a readers group, and it's gone literally all around the internet. Like I do a search every week and it's like, oh, it's going around all these groups again. It keeps going and going. And like, but so I like that was something we just did literally to explain why a book that's set in America will have British English, Irish English, as we call it, spellings in it. And it's because all the other books did, so it wouldn't make sense to change them. But I felt it was justified to explain that because it's a book set in America. And I thought if you're coming to it for the first book in the new series, it might confuse somebody. So that's why we did that. But my authors, though, since then I've just made a running joke of doing an author's note. And there's a running joke about me blaming my mother for how things are spelt and all this. But like my next one is, because you gave me the idea, because you said, well, our author's going to put a note in saying it wasn't written by AI. And I'm going to put a note in saying this book was not written by AI. Although, if AI was ever going to be able to write anything, surely it would be an author's note. This was the bit you could teach AI, but you're never going to be able to teach it to write the book.
Going from AI onto selling the near future, particularly post-apocalyptic fiction. And I don't know if you got this. I remember when just before COVID happened and lockdown happened and everything went horribly wrong, I had optioned a children's book, not one of mine. It was another author's that I wanted to adapt as a TV show, and it was set in a post-apocalyptic future. Quite a bucolic one, actually. Quite a pleasant one as things go. It wasn't zombies or anything like that, but my agent, I put a lot of work into the pitch deck and ideas for the show and episode guides and everything. And my agent just came back and says, no one wants it. No one wants it. Did you have any of this? I mean, selling post-apocalyptic fiction is not easy, is it, these days?
No, it was a weird thing at the start of lockdown. I remember literally author groups saying post-apocalyptic fiction is going to do really well. I was like, I thought it was the exact opposite, because I think people will look for escapism. And I know certainly I did. So, I mean, there is that thing. Yeah. I mean, you can, maybe publishers and stuff don't want it, but you can still do it yourself. And there's still a market for it, I get. But yeah, it is, it's one of these things that goes through phases, I think, of being popular and unpopular. It's like vampires and stuff where they, some things So I think they will always hit, but I guess the problem with post-apocalyptic stuff, if you do near future, there is the other problem as well. That the problem with the near future is that at some point it becomes the present, and then you end up looking bad because you've got all the predictions wrong. But yeah, it can be quite challenging. They do it on TV and stuff, and it's quite hard to get right on TV as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, at the moment we're the big TV show is The Last of Us, which is based on a computer game, post-apocalyptic computer, and I'm loving it. It's fantastic. It's incredibly popular. So, and I remember when during lockdown, Golantz took my book Robot Overlords, which isn't it's post-robot invasion, but everyone is confined to their homes. So they changed all the copy in the blurb, to say, stay inside. This is a book about not going outside. Now, I had no idea if it helped sales at all. I suspect that it probably didn't. But the thing with Peter's book is that, you heard Peter there talking about climate change and and the research that he's done and the terrible consequences of it all. But it says here, this is an expertly crafted page turner set in the isolated Scottish Highlands. And it talks about, it might say that it's set in the future where climate change has changed, the environment and what have you. But the blurb doesn't lean into that because I suspect people aren't going, oh, goody, let's have something grim about climate change, which this isn't, to be absolutely clear. Peter has written a proper page turning thriller, but it's, yeah, it's something that I think particularly if you're self-publishing as well, you need to think about how you word these things so that you don't want to sell a message, do you? You don't want to lecture people. You want to primarily you're there to entertain people, aren't you?
Yeah, I mean, that is the tricky thing. I weirdly saw this in as a stand-up mate of mine who's doing a show about global warming, and he was like, the ongoing debate where people saying, do you want to call it this? And people are giving advice going, oh, that's going to turn people off. And he's going, but his point was, but at the same time, it is going to be funny, but it is going to be a show about global warming. So I don't want to hoodwink people in. So there is that fine line where what you emphasize in a blurb, and there's two schools of thought on it in some ways. I mean, you need to make any blurb sound like a compelling story. People don't want a TED talk from a fiction book. They want a fiction book. Yeah. So they fundamentally, they want a story, and you have to make your point through story. But there is that thing where when we started trying to get back in the day, when a man at one of those faces was out trying to get an agent and publishers and stuff, I had an agent tell us we're going to have to hide the comedy element away and we'll make it sound like a conventional crime book. And I was like, that's stupid. That's my USP. They were like, no, because they don't like something different. But my logic, and I think was right, was I think you have to tell people it's going to be funny if it's going to be funny. I think it's silly to hide it away. So to go back to that, I think you always have to emphasize the story. Story has to be the thing that will make the point. Because, again, use an example, the one I always use, Terry Pratchett, he, as you know, because you've read the same books as I have, he was brilliant making points about everything from racism to gun control, sexism, economics. He's famously, that quote about boots has been used again and again this year about the hysteria of boots. But Terry Pratchett did all that in a story because he knew he couldn't just preach at people. He had to get them in and keep them enthralled, and then he could make points once you had them.
Yes, if you want to preach, there are some nice spaces down on Hyde Park Corner where you can stand up and hector people. So yeah, go there. Let's talk about swapping genre as well, which I know is something you've had. I mean, the Stranger Times books are a little, compared to the Bunny books are very much in the real world. Stranger Times, slight genre books, so making that adjustment where, and Peter May talked about this idea that, particularly with the lockdown book as well, that he was talking about, where would readers accept making that shift? This is something that publishers get very nervous about, isn't it?
It is, and they, again, I guess you could criticize, publishing a little bit and say they're always a little bit conservative in these things, but they do worry about, like when I did the Stranger Times, it was a different genre because it's got paranormal elements into it, But at the same time, there was the crossover where it's still considered crime. It got nominated for a crime award last year, bizarrely, which we only got nominated for a crime award, and we don't really consider it a crime book, to the point where we got the email from like Harrogate where they announced the people who'd been nominated for those awards, and we never knew because we didn't bother looking at it because it never occurred to us we could be in it. And then we got nominated for a crime award, which is lovely, but to say it was surprising is an understatement. But the point is, yeah, you do change genre and people like you to stay in your lane, but at the same time, it is one of those things that you can certainly do it. And a lot of really great authors have to. Stephen King writes out whatever the hell he wants, but that's because Stephen King, all you need for Stella Stephen King book is the name Stephen King on the front. But, you know, he's I think it's one of those things that you can earn the privilege, if you like, where you've been successful enough that you can do something different. And you just have to understand that a section of your audience will definitely go with you. That's what happened with me. But a section of them will definitely not. Like if it's got paranormal in it, like mine did. I think I told you before we started recording. First time ever I got this, but I got a tweet from someone today about the Stranger Times books. He said, I don't like these supernatural things when you go back to writing proper stories. And I tweeted back, no, thank you for your input. Because, you know, what am I going to say to that? Well, thank you, man I've never met. Now that you've told me that you didn't like that book, I'll stop writing it. Thank you. But the point is that is reflective of a small part of the audience, but that's fine as long as you know that going in. The other side of it is you'll pick up people who would never have bought your books the other way. And these things can help. Like Ian Sainsbury is a good mate of ours, been on the podcast and stuff. He's been on different genres and he'll tell you there's upsides and downsides. Yeah. But I think it's one of these things that if you want to keep going in both genres, I would say you probably have to be a pretty productive writer, because in any series, if you're leaving gaps of more than a year between books, you're going to start losing people. So you need to be able to spin the plate. So if you are very productive, I think you can probably do that. Or if you're someone like Peter May who understands, you know, he's doing something different, going to a different area of what's essentially the same genre, it's still a crime book, then you can certainly do that. But obviously it wouldn't be the same as if he wrote the next one of the series or one of his either of his successful series. But it's just one of these things. As long as you understand it, you can certainly do it.
Yeah, I think understanding expectations is key as well. I remember when I worked at Headline, we published James Patterson, and he'd be doing, you know, incredible thrillers, huge success. Then out of the blue, he said, I've written sort of a spiritual book about golfing. And we're like, okay, fine. And, you know, obviously we sold it and hardly, you know, compared to what he normally sells, the sales were down. But when we sold it in, our targets as salespeople were way down on what you'd normally have with a James Patterson thriller. So there is that kind of understanding. And as you say, some authors earn the right to do that, and others. I mean, for me, my career, I'm sort of fumbling around all over the place. I wrote a book about robots. I wrote a time travel book. I wrote a fantasy novel, and now I've got a series, and that's people like that. And I'm sort of taking the stuff that people like about that and taking it forward. And I'm working on a novella of something I might self-publish. And it's very much the same but different. I'm not going off and writing, you know, a crime thriller or anything like that. So that said, I might have a cozy crime book coming out next year as well, but then, you know, watch the space. But so yeah, it's coming back to that thing we were talking about earlier about the pressure of the contract. There's also the pressure of reader expectation. But I think as long as you give people a steer and temper your own expectations of how it's going to do, then I think you're going to be okay.
Yeah, and look, there's always going to be reader expectations, and that's a good thing. If you don't have reader expectations, you don't have a career. Let's be clear. But it's like you've had that. It's the funniest thing. Myself and the wife have a running joke about it: is how long after a book has been published until we get the first email that says when's the next one coming out?
Yeah,
and it's generally the same day as publication most of the time now. Yeah, you know, which is great because you remember when your first book came out and you had to convince people to try and get them to read the thing. So it's lovely. But yeah, it's one of these things that you just have to be able to manage it and kind of know your own limitations and stuff, and be careful about burning out and all that kind of stuff, because, you know, you want to have a long career, and the last thing you want to do is get yourself to the point where you're hating doing what you're doing just because you've pushed yourself too hard. So with everything, there's a balance with these things, isn't there?
Absolutely. There absolutely is. Okay, over on social media, lots of good news happening over there. We had a lovely tweet from Jenny Roman, who is at Slightly Turquoise on Twitter. And she says she's written a blog on how the 200 words a day challenge has transformed her writing. And she said, I've read gazillions of books on the craft of writing, but this one really, really works. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes so you can check that out. And the 200 word a day challenge, completely free to sign up to. Follow the hashtag 200 words a day on Twitter. You'll find me there and writers like Jenny who are doing little and often every day, and it's making a huge difference. And one person who's benefited from that is our very own Mark Hood, who, in terms of the 200 word a day challenge, is just the master. His word count has been astonishing. I think he's up to something like 700,000 words written so far on the challenge. And his book is finally here. He says it's finally time. The Fairies Want Me Dead, which is his new book, is available for pre-order and coming out on the 1st of February. And it's an absolutely cracking read. So I'm going to put a pre-order link in there. Huge congrats to you, Mark. It's been a long time coming, but very, very much well deserved. And something that's happening on, it's kind of happened completely on its own over on the Bestseller Experiment Facebook group, is Jackie Kirkham, who's a valued member of our group there. She started these regular, what she calls shut up and write lessons, which is where, writers just gather together just for an hour or so and then just shut up and write and be accountable to one another. And it's really working. Rachel Chapman in our group, she said, I just want to say thanks to Jackie Kirkham for organising the shut up and write sessions. I joined today for my first one and banged out 1,022 new words, just what I need. It was really motivating to join in. If you're in a slump word-wise and you can make the next one, it really is worth it. Well, how do you get into the Facebook group for the Bestseller Experiment? You support us on Patreon. It's one of the many, and also sign up to the Academy as well. It's one of the many bonuses you've got there. So go to bestsellerexperiment.com/support to find out more. So, Caimh, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been an absolute delight.
It's been a real pleasure. It's great to catch up with you. I'll be seeing you in the real world soon as well.
Yes, exciting.
Yeah, it's going to be fun. It's going to be an interesting year. Definitely an interesting year. All kinds of stuff going on. Now, folks,
best of luck with the movie. By the way, we haven't.
Yeah, I mean, now, listeners, we're recording this almost a week before this episode goes live. So the film isn't out yet, but by the time this episode goes live, the film will have been out for a few days. So it would have been reviewed and people would have seen it at the cinema. And I have no idea what to expect.
Are you going to go see it in the cinema?
No way. I've done it twice already. We went, when we went to the Sitges Festival in Spain, we had 2 screenings there. And both John and I said the same thing. We said, we're going to sit down for 10 minutes. We're going to sneak out the back. But both times we ended up sitting through it all the way through because the audiences there were great. But that's the festival audience. That there are people who are big horror fans, monster fans, and they're very excitable and they make noises and they whoop and they clap. What I don't want to do, with all due respect to the View in Thanet up the road for me, is sit there on a Saturday where someone's looking at their phone, someone's crunching on popcorn, and I just can't. I can't do it. Can't bring myself to do it. So no, I don't think so. Anyway, I can't. Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah, no, I can kind of see that. I did have that in a shop in Germany where someone came in and my books were on display because I was just in there doing stuff. And then this teenage girl started telling her mother she got the first one. And like my wife was there and I'm going over there. I said, well, I don't want to be here for the conversation. Yeah. Now, as it turned out, she likes the books and the guy literally behind the counter said, the guy you wrote is just standing over there. Which they were a bit, and then they came over and said hello and stuff. But yeah, I can't, now you mention it. Yeah, I can see why you wouldn't want to be there with somebody looking at their phone. That does make more sense. Well, I'm going to go. I'm bringing my mate because as you know, I'm a wuss who's terrified of horror movies. I haven't seen any of the great horror movies, but I'm going. I'm bringing my mate Gary Delaney because he's a big horror buff. So me and him are going because I basically said, because we always used to go to cinema together and we never go to horror films because I'm scared of them. But I've now said, because as you promised me that I'm thanked in the credits at the end.
You are thanked in the credits, yeah.
So because of that, I'm willing to go see a horror movie. So I hope you appreciate the sacrifice I'm making. And then Gary's delighted because neither me or his wife ever go to the horror movies with him. So he's chuffed now. He gets to go to see one. So we're going hopefully next Monday, all being well.
Fantastic. And the reason Caimh is thanked in the credits is because, I've got Irish family, but I'm not Irish. So, and we've written this script set in Ireland, and we gave it to you and another Irishman I know called Lawrence Doherty, and we said, look, what are the terrible? How have we put our foot in our mouths? What have we done? What are the terrible Irish cliches? Set us right, and I think we did all right, didn't we?
I don't think there was. Yeah, there generally wasn't anything that was like obviously wrong in that sense. I know what the main thing we discussed was, which ended up getting taken out, was a character in the pub was going to say something racist. And I was literally going through about how an Irish person would be racist, which is unfortunately, let's just say there's been quite a bit an uptick of that recently in Ireland, God help us. Yeah, that was the only discussion about like what was the kind of thing that they would say. But I think that ended up getting taken out because it was such a difficult moment, wasn't it?
Yeah, that got cut. The other thing that got cut was I put a fruit machine in an Irish pub, and you said
I told you that. Yeah, that was I said that's not. They never have them, and they don't. They can't have the gambling ones, and they also don't like the quiz ones. Yeah. To the point where I think I used this in a script, but it was true based on my mate's granddad's pub, where someone put a quiz machine in. It was making all this noise, and they literally. Someone distracted the thing and they got a trolley and took it and put it outside in the car. Like the patrons took it outside and put it in the car park. And your man came back and said, "Where's my quiz machine?" And we're like, they're all just sitting there going, "We don't like it. We're not having it." And that was how they got the message across. But yeah, no, they don't. They generally don't have them in Ireland. I think that was the biggest point. That's right. I forgot now. It's good.
Course, yeah.
Every time the pub comes up now, I'm going to point out to Gary, see, there's no quiz machine. That was me.
That bit, because it was a scene where someone was thrown against it, and that's been cut, actually. That was cut before we even shot. So yeah. But yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Queeve. Much appreciated. Yeah, do stay. Always hang around for the end credits, folks. You never know whose names you're going to see in there. Folks, if you want to get in touch, we're on social media. On Facebook, we're Bestseller Experiment. On Twitter and Instagram, we are at BestsellerXP. Drop us a line at bestsellerexperiment.com. There's a contact tab there. And sign up to our newsletter as well. We send out a regular newsletter, which has all the inside information, all the links that you need to find out more about us and the Academy and Patreon and all that good stuff. Queeve, good luck, mate. Thank you so much. Love Will Tear Us Apart, coming out very, very soon. If you haven't got that one, get the other two first, read them in quick succession, and just treat yourself, folks. Again, stick a link in the show notes. You can check that out.
Cheers. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute delight.
Lovely stuff. And it's a goodbye from Mark 1.
And it's a goodbye from Substitute Mark 2.
Goodbye. Four, 5, 6, 7, 8.
That was 9. You said do it on 8. That was 9. You fucking idiot. Do it again.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
No, that's 9. You said you were doing it on 8.
No, but this is like that scene in Time Bandits. Who goes on 2?
It's like,
nobody goes on 2.
It's Lethal Weapon about throwing you over the thing on the toilet.
We'll do it on 9
8.
then. We'll do it. No, do it on 9 because that's how I've
9.
done it for 6 years.
Okay, right, go on then.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.